Well, thank you, David, and welcome. Good morning. I was here about a year ago, and I addressed a group on a topic of world-class procurement. And when I did that, I talked about the performance. Actually, I started off talking about our definition of world-class performance and how we define that. But where I spent most of my time was understanding the performance of these world-class procurement organizations from a very quantitative type of look. Looked at some of the efficiency and effectiveness performance measures of these organizations. But most importantly, I spent a lot of time talking about the practices. What are these organizations doing that allow them to drive the world-class performance that they actually achieve? Today, we're talking about this idea of procurement comes to age. And to address this, what I'm going to focus on is talking about procurement value, procurement's value proposition, what it is, how it's being challenged today, our traditional value proposition to the business today, and how we have to evolve that value proposition. And then touch on and provide some highlights around the capabilities required to support that evolving value proposition we have to the businesses and functions that we support. And I'm going to close with some final thoughts. So to begin, just a couple of definitional guidelines. I'm going to be talking about procurement. So one thing is how we define procurement. The way we define procurement is a set of processes. And you see a whole bunch of processes on this particular chart here. We look at procurement as a set of activities, processes, rather than an organization. So when you look at this chart, our definition of procurement includes both tactical, more transactional activities, such as requisition and PO processing, supplier scheduling, receipt processing, supply data management, as well as all the sourcing and supply management activities that you see as you move to the right of the chart. So this is sort of the all-in scope. When I mention procurement, I'm talking about investments and things like that. This is what I'm using as the guideline and what I define as the sort of set of activities that define procurement. The other thing I'll be using, and I'll touch on, is the idea of world-class. So I just want to touch on our definition of world-class. World-class organizations, as we define them, are those organizations that are top quartile performers, both from an efficiency standpoint as well as from an effectiveness standpoint. So what you see on here, it's all those organizations that are in that blue box at the upper right-hand corner of this particular chart. And when we look at that, and you say, well, what's effectiveness? Well, effectiveness is looking at such indicators as economic return, your spend cost savings, your spend cost avoidance, the performance of your supply base, your satisfaction levels with the customers, internal stakeholders that you support, are all indicators of how effective as a procurement organization you are. And then your efficiency is really looked at, and we look at indicators such as your process costs, your cycle times, how fast you are, your staffing levels, your leverage of technology, all indicators of how efficient you are. So the world-class organizations are those that are top quartile performers in both efficiency and effectiveness. So I'll use the term world-class. So it's those organizations, the characteristics of those. The other thing I'll use is a term called peer group. And peer group is basically all of the organizations that are not in the blue box. Okay? So let's take a brief glimpse at where we are in procurement today. And when I say it, it's a real brief glimpse, just a high-level view of procurement performance. One thing that we do in procurement is we certainly invest in performing all of that activity that you saw on that slide that I just showed with all of those processes and activities. And today, when you look at that investment and we look at the labor, the talent that we're investing in performing that activity, the technology investments, the outsourcing, if we have to outsource and have a third party performing those activities for us, as well as other costs. Could be travel costs. Travel to go see our suppliers sitting in China and Asia and India, etc. Those are your investments in performing procurement. And today, what you find is the average organization and a median organization is spending about 0.82% of their total annual spend on performing those activities from a labor, outsourcing, technology, and other costs. World-class organizations are doing it for a bit less. And then from a staffing level standpoint, the chart on the bottom here, what you find is that the world-class organizations are doing it even for less, of a bigger gap than what you see in the peer group organizations. And what that tells you is that the world-class organizations are actually spending more on their talent on a per FTE basis, which is an indicator of having better talent than the non-world-class organizations. So those are the investments we're making. So the question is, well, what kind of return are we getting for those investments in performing all of that activity, procurement activity, for our businesses? And what you find from a very traditional standpoint, the spend cost savings that we're returning are about 4.4% of our total annual spend for world-class organizations and 2.3% for the non-world-class organizations. And this is spend cost reduction savings as well as spend cost avoidance. And for the most part, this has been a nice return. 7-1 for the world-class organizations. And I made this comment yesterday. I don't know if you all invest in the stock market, but I certainly do. And if I can get a 3-to-1 return, even as an average organization on the money that I'm investing, that's a pretty darn good return. So we've actually been performing fairly well as an organization in terms of the returns our businesses are receiving in a very traditional sense based on the investments they're making in performing procurement activity. It's a decision that a business makes. But the challenges are mounting. One of the things that we find is that over the last 10 years, and we've been benchmarking procurement organizations since about the mid-90s, is that the cost of procurement, that overall cost of procurement has been declining. And what you find is that businesses, not just in procurement, whether it's in finance, IT, HR, we're being asked to do a lot more for less. Okay? And so what you see here is a declining investments in the function of procurement. So you might say, well, that's crazy, Chris. We've been looking at and we've been investing in better talent. We've been going out and getting technology and procurement, et cetera. Well, absolutely. But what we've been finding is that, yeah, we're certainly investing more from the absolute perspective in procurement, but the rate of our business growth has been increasing faster than that. So in effect, what you're finding is that the overall percent of the annual spend of cost of procurement has been declining. And more importantly, as you look at what we were doing in 1995 from an activity standpoint compared to what we're doing today, we're doing a lot more. We barely knew what spend analysis was in 1995. Certainly didn't have the tools in place, and we're doing those types of activities today. We're focused much more on risk, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, the investment's coming down, and we're doing more for those investments. And it's a challenge, and we're continuing to be challenged even further on that, especially if we're going into a recessionary type of period. The other thing that's happening is our traditional value proposition back to the business, spend cost savings, is being challenged. It's being shaken. And what you found over the last several years, our overall spend cost reduction savings to our businesses has been declining overall. Whether you're world-class or non-world-class, you've been seeing a declining investments there. And why is that happening? Lots of reasons. If you look at the PPI charts down here, we see tighter supply markets on the chart on the left. We also see much more volatility in the supply markets as well. We have suppliers today that are much more formidable. They're much more selective in terms of who they want to do business with, sort of the so-called customer of choice that we're all trying to become. And even more than that, the tools that we've been using, the sourcing execution methodologies that are delivering less and less returns back to us. I mean, you only can go back to the well so many times. We're seeing a diminishing level of returns in some cases for the efforts that we're putting in. I have a couple of examples there. I have an organization in Texas. It was an energy company. And they contacted me and said, Chris, we've been concerned that over the last 10 years, we've been a fairly mature organization. We're driving a lot of spend cost reduction savings. And last year we returned, I'll make up a number, $50 million back to the business. Well, this year we're on track to return about $30 million. And we've invested in our business. I've got them to invest in new talent, new capabilities, technology, but it was all based on this value proposition of spend cost reduction savings. And now with that declining, they're now coming back to me and questioning the investments that they made. So what do we do? And certainly another challenge is that our stakeholders aren't necessarily seeing the services that we deliver back to them to the level that we want them to. We survey a lot of the stakeholders in these benchmarking studies, not within procurement, but the stakeholders of procurement, the executives, the customers, and internally, the requisitioners, et cetera, around procurement services. And what we find is that only about 9% of our stakeholders see us as the valued business partner that we so seek as an organization. Now, there's some better than that, and there's some worse than that. But we're only seeing about 9%. More importantly is the over 50% to still see us as the gatekeeper and administrator that we're trying to move away from. And if you look at the chart on the right, the ability for us to exceed the expectations of our stakeholders. Even the world-class organizations, only 33% of them are able to exceed the expectations of the stakeholders and the expectations that they have of what we do. So we're being challenged. In some ways, you might say that we've entered into a sort of a perfect storm. Now, I have a colleague that likes to have these play on words, and he sort of puts this together. So S, right? Sustainable savings. How do we deal with the difficulties and the challenges to sustain the types of savings with the tight supply markets, the volatility of them, etc. T, technology and talent. I have conversations on a weekly basis with various leaders of procurement across lots of different organizations. And one of the most common discussions I have, and I'll even be having one of those discussions I think later this afternoon with a client of mine here in the UK, is around talent. How do we acquire it? How do we find? We get new expectations on new capabilities. How do we find that talent? Because the capability expectations are different today. And how do we retain it? How do we develop it? How do we rotate it? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Talent is one of the top issues in procurement today. Operational challenges. We're still spending way too much money and time and investment on performing those tactical and transactional activities that you saw to the left, that one chart that I showed up. Today, 60 to 70% of our investments in procurement for the average organization are still focused on those operational support activities and not on the sourcing and supplier management activities that drive the percentage and most of the value back to our organizations. That's sort of the reality today. So we're still challenged with that in terms of how to shift those investments and focus areas. Risk and regulations. Certainly you don't have to look too far to see the risk in the marketplace. We're certainly focusing on it more today. Whether it's volatility risk and price risk that I was showing before, whether it's geopolitical risk, intellectual property risk, natural hazard disaster risk with our supply chains that are spread all over the world, we get a lot more risks in the world and regulations. And then the M, more and more and more. And I said, you saw that chart of declining cost of procurement and expecting more and more stuff. Our businesses want more innovation. They want more brand enhancement. They expect us to focus on sustainability. There's a lot more being asked of us as professionals. A quote. Now, this is not a new quote. This is something that's been around for a little while. Tony Santiago, who's the VP of Global Strategic Sourcing over at Bristol Myers. In years 3 and 4 of the group's existence, Santiago notes that the global strategic sourcing hit somewhat of a plateau, where annual savings diminished from $252 million to approximately $200 million. And this inspired the group to shift its focus to both alignment and to technology. But alignment is tricky. As you look at your organizations and you see all the different stakeholders we have in our organization today, we got their CEO, the shareholders, the board. We have our customers, the functions, the businesses, the requisitioners that we deal with. We have our suppliers. We have our line staff. They're all stakeholders in this set of activities, this set of processes of procurement that you see sort of highlighted in the middle. And more importantly, is that all these stakeholders have divergent views of what value is. What our CEO expects is different than what our businesses expect versus the requisitioners versus suppliers, etc. And we have to deal with all of these because fundamental to driving competitive advantage is aligning all of those processes to the businesses to drive competitive advantage. So, we have these challenges. The idea of doing more for less. Our traditional value proposition is being shaken around spend savings. We're seeing some declining returns there. Our stakeholders aren't as happy about our services as we would like them or as satisfied with our services as we would like them. So the question is we have to evolve. We have to evolve our value proposition to the businesses that we serve. So the question is and we have to evolve it to beyond to what we're doing today. Just focus on costs and risks, etc. And we're starting to do that and harnessing what I'll call the supply markets for competitive advantage. About a year and a half ago, a colleague of mine and myself, we were invited out to California, to the Silicon Valley. That's for San Francisco, San Jose, a lot of technology companies out there. And they had this group out there called the Bay Area Technical Procurement Council. Includes, some of the big technology companies in the Bay Area, and there's about 15, 16 of them. Well, they had us come out and they said, here's the challenge. What we're doing, and they started seeing, no different than Tony Santiago over at Bristol Myers Squibb, we're starting to see this challenge in the oil company I mentioned down in Houston. This declining savings and things like that. And what we're concerned about is, what do we do about that? Because we certainly don't want organizations to start questioning the investments they're making in procurement. So what do we do about that? And how do we evolve our value proposition back to the businesses that we serve? Ensure long-term relevance of the organization. So what we developed was a 5-stage value proposition model. And what you see here is this model, this pyramid of value stages within a procurement organization. So what I'm going to do is walk through this with you. At the very foundation of value and our value back to the organizations that we support is supply assurance. And what you see is this is really focused on getting the right goods to the right place at the right time. And as a result of that, and as a result of that value proposition, we had a role in the organization. We developed competencies and capabilities around buying, planning, and expediting and things like that. But we delivered that particular, and even mitigating some of the risks that we're seeing today, but to assure the supply back to the organization. And what you'll find as you walk up this chart is there's not only increasing value, but also the role of procurement changes. What we measure changes as we evolve our value proposition. Our capabilities have to change to support these elevating views around value as we move up this chart. But as we move to stage 2 here, the business say, you know what? You got the right stuff, the right place, at the right time. Do you think you can get it to me at a good price? They said, okay. We developed other capabilities within our organizations. Negotiation skills. We put in end-step sourcing methodologies, where 7-step, 9-step, 18-step I've seen, 5-step, whatever. But we developed capabilities around strategic sourcing. We started separating the tactical activities of the organization from the strategic sourcing activities. And we started developing those capabilities to deliver on this. We even introduced tools, e-auctions, e-sourcing, all those types of tools to sort of support this kind of sourcing execution to drive the right price. But the business said, you know what? It's more than price. There's a total cost here, whether it's total landed cost, total cost of ownership, life cycle costs, what have you. But there's more than just the supplier margins. Can you help us reduce the overall cost picture of what we're doing? And we had to develop new capabilities, right? Cost modeling, being able to be better with supply market analysis, supplier analysis, and develop those capabilities, better understanding what are all the elements of cost within the things that in the markets that we deal with, and what are the drivers of those costs, and then doing scenario analysis around those. But we found that was difficult. Right? A lot of analytical capabilities, as well as a lot of organizational barriers to actually developing those capabilities in some cases. So when you look at this, the first 3 stages are really focused on a lot of cost, supply assurance and cost. In a lot of ways, when we developed our organizations, we came in, there was a lot of distributed procurement activity around. When we looked at all the different supply markets and we created the procurement organization, we focused on leverage. Say, hey, we're going to go out there and we're going to get some savings. Right? We're going to create a commodity structured organization. We're going to save a lot of money, and we're going to get very focused on the supply markets themselves. But then what we did is we started hitting this wall, the wall that Bristol-Myers Squibb hit, and the savings started reducing. And I said, all right, where are we going to find the other sources of value? So we've had to turn ourselves back to the business and get aligned more effectively with the business, because that's where the other sources of value are. Very focused on supply. So now we have to develop some capabilities back with aligning ourselves more effectively with the businesses that we support. So we move into a stage of demand management in stage 4. We start focusing on demand, not just reducing demand, but shaping demand, making some of the products that we actually source for more attractive within the marketplace. Specification, enhancements, etc. And ultimately, value management. And value management is really focused on not just looking at the spend magnitude, because if you look at the 4 stages below that, we looked at cost, and cost times quantity equals spend. And level 4 is starting to look at quantity, which certainly is in the realm of the customer, but now not looking just at the magnitude of the spend, but also what is the utility, the value of the spend that we're doing anyway, and how do we improve upon that? And that's really where we start harnessing the power of supply markets to drive competitive advantage back to our businesses. Another view of this chart is this one. I know it's a bit of an eye chart. But what I want to show, there's a couple of points I wanted to make on this. One was, you might look at this model and say, one of the points I wanted to make was that it builds on each other. Just because you move to stage 2 doesn't mean that stage 1 isn't important. Certainly, again, assurance of supply is actually it's foundational to the value that we do as a procurement organization. But we're looking to incrementally add additional value components to our overall value proposition. So they build on each other. The other thing to remind and to note here, it's not necessarily sequential. Most folks, it's not that you go to 1, and once you complete 1, then you go to 2, and then once you complete 2, you go to 3. Most folks, and I'm sure all of you will look at this chart and say, you know what, we do a little 5, we do a little 4, we do a little 2, we do a little 3. But for the most part, most organizations could probably say, our primary value proposition back to the business is in stage 2. That's where we've got most of the capabilities of the organization designed to do the sourcing execution type of work. Or we've created an organization that's really good at cost modeling, and we're firmly situated in stage 3. What you'll find is you're in various areas. And you can actually use this chart to assess your own business. Look at all your various customers that you work with and say, all right, various businesses, where are we? Business number 1, we may be firmly in stage 4. Business number 2, stage 3. You can even look at it on a commodity standpoint. Look at the various spend areas. In travel and indirect spend, we're in stage 4. We got policies in place, certainly a demand management type of, tool. And in resins or whatever, we may be in stage 3 and, whatever. But you can assess and take a look at yourself. Various stakeholders, various spend areas, etc. And I wanted to show this one. Again, it's a chart, but it's other details to take a look at. As procurement continues to expand its circle of influence within the business across all those various stakeholders I talked about, you look at your various value propositions with each of those stakeholders. And what I've shown here is just an example, looking at those 5 components in various stakeholders: the requisitioners, the customers, the functions of businesses, the executive management, the CEO, the board, etc., suppliers, and line staff. And what you see is you can evolve your value proposition to each one of those particular stakeholders of the business. But evolving hasn't been easy. Just transitioning from stage 2, price, to total cost of ownership has been challenging. One of the leaders of procurement at one of the big oil companies I work with made a comment to me, one time I was sitting there and this person had mentioned, they said, I was at a meeting. It was a, big Fortune 100 type of meeting, a lot of leaders of procurement from various big organizations. And they sort of polled the room in terms of who had robust total cost of ownership models in place. And she said, hardly anybody raised their hand. Why is that? There's reasons for that. I said, I don't disagree with it, because certainly our data is showing the same thing. 33% of the world-class organizations are utilizing total cost ownership models to a high degree. We've been talking about it for years, 10 years plus. But we just don't have it pervasive in our organization today. We're not focused as much on this type of area. And there's barriers, like I said before. There's barriers. There's organizational barriers. Certainly, it takes a lot of analytical capabilities of the organization to really drive cost modeling types of capabilities. But at the same time, there's organizational barriers sometimes. You got organizations that say, hey, we're focused on this particular year, and anything outside of that, if you're looking at life cycle costs, anything outside of that, I don't care about. Focus on the price. Year 1, that's what my budgets are, so go get me a good price. So we got some challenges there in getting that off the ground. It's really an organizational capability, not just a procurement capability. And just moving to stage from 3 to 4, remember, when we moved from the first 3 stages into stages 4 and 5, we went from more being focused on the supply management to being much more aligned with our customers. Where are the other sources? When we're focused on demand management and value management, we need to understand and get ourselves aligned around the business, understand what those things are, and bring, as I mentioned before, the power of supply markets back to that. One of the activities that you can do, and what we look for as an indication in organizations, is the involvement of procurement in the planning and budgeting process of the business. And are they involved? And again, what we do is we still find organizations challenging this. We're not highly and actively involved in the planning and budgeting processes of the business. And certainly a key activity and practice for organizations really to transition their value proposition to those higher levels. Ultimately, level 5. And level 5 is really where we seize upon the imperatives of our corporations and help drive those particular areas through the power of the supply markets. And I just threw some up here. Innovation. We're talking, that's It's becoming one of those overused terms already. But there's innovation, working capital, supply risks, corporate social responsibility. And for the most part, we find that our capabilities to support these types of initiatives across the board are fairly immature still. I mean, we do have capabilities, and certainly people are dabbling in a lot of these areas, but we're still challenged in terms of truly driving some of these particular areas for the businesses that we support. And there's the megatrend of globalization. You know, right now, I mean, certainly as a procurement organization, we're involved in globalization. We're going out there, we're sourcing in the low-cost countries for our particular businesses, et cetera. But there's another globalization trend. It's around labor. Right? If you look at a business, I mean, you got a lot of spend going to third-party suppliers, and procurement's been primarily focused on the supply chain, the goods and services that we buy from third-party suppliers. But there's this other big component of our business called labor, and we're sourcing that. We're called business process sourcing. And if you decompose your business, sort of like what I decomposed procurement in that chart earlier on, say, here's all the activities. And what do we do with those activities? Should we do them ourselves? Should we insource those activities? Should we outsource them? Should we offshore them, nearshore them, onshore them? These are make versus buy types of decisions. These are sourcing decisions. And for the most part, when procurement gets involved in this business process sourcing activity, it's a tail end. Hey, we just went out and started having a discussion and started putting a contract together with outsourcing for our call center. Can you take a look at the contract and tell us and negotiate and see if we can get a better price? We're not driving that process. When you look at the supply chain, we've gone out, we do spend analysis, we identify opportunities, we proactively identify opportunities, and we go out and we drive those. Why aren't we doing that in this other mega trend that's occurring? This trend is going to be around for the next 5 or 10 years. It's a void out there. For most organizations, there's nobody leading this effort within organizations. It's an opportunity. So procurement's evolution is an iterative process. And one of the key things here from an evolution standpoint is we as procurement have to sort of take all of that activity in that big box in the middle there, our resources, our operating model, which is our governance, our strategy, our planning, et cetera, and all our processes, and align that with the business strategy. And that's what drives competitive advantage. But if you're going to accelerate your evolution as a procurement organization, you have to evolve yourself and evolve your capabilities across all of these various dimensions. And I sort of highlighted those 3 big areas: the resource management, the core process management, which is all those processes, and we sort of look at it in 11 processes, as well as your operating model. And what we did at the Hackett Group is we created a 4-stage procurement capability maturity model that supports the value evolution that we're all have to go through. Because you can't evolve your value proposition without making the investments to evolve your capabilities as an organization across all of these different dimensions. Now, to do that, we did it across all of these areas. And so for each of these various areas here, there's 4 stages and the characteristics of organizations in each one of these dimensions. Well, that's about 14 pages long. I'm not going to show you all 14 pages. Instead, I summarized it to about a half-page PowerPoint. But what you see is, what we've done here, is a couple of things on this particular chart, is aligned the procurement capability maturity model to the value proposition. So what you see in stage 1, or level 1, as a capability maturity, are some of the characteristics. Again, we bro those and just threw a few things up there. But in level 1 is really a reactive organization. You're firefighting. And that certainly supports the level 1 or stage 1 value proposition of assurance of supply. Level 2 is planned. You're focused on reducing cost. And that's certainly aligned to stages 2 and 3 of price and total cost in the value proposition model. And certainly in that particular area, you see some of the characteristics. You have strategic sourcing processes in place. You're even starting to do some supplier relationship management types of activities, as well as you have some of the metrics in place and primarily focused on cost, PPV, et cetera. When we move to level 3 capabilities, you see an organization that's starting to support the business strategy. And that certainly supports our stage 4 value proposition of demand management. And here what you're starting to see is, procurement organizations with a very clear operating model, typically center-led, in most cases. Single process accountability across the purchase to pay on a transactional side, across the end-to-end process is some of the characteristics, and balanced scorecards in place. On a level 4 standpoint, where we're not just supporting the business strategy, we're influencing the business strategy. And that's certainly supporting the level 5 value proposition from a capability standpoint of being a true value management. And the key here, not going through all these details, is that you've really switched from being a center-led organization to a customer-led organization. So one of the questions we always get is, where do we line up on this? Where do organizations line up on this today? So for the most part, we look at all the characteristics of these world-class and peer group non-world-class organizations. What we find is the world-class organizations are pretty much span an area, but they're fairly cemented in the stage 4, touching into stage 5, and still from an area, this is sort of the range of the world-class organizations. From a peer group standpoint, pretty much in the 2 to 3 value proposition area, basically a level 2 from a capability standpoint. Most of us today still focused on sort of this planned, reduced cost type of mode. Not that it's not important, as I said, the value propositions are additive. They build upon each other. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip that last one on talent. Not that it's not important. A couple of closing comments as I go through this. It's important as you look at all of this, and I think that what I tried to do here today was understand that there are some challenges in our organizations today as a procurement professional. We've had a nice run at it for 10 plus years, in some pretty somewhat deflationary types of market, and the challenges in the markets are getting tougher. And we as an organization have to continue to evolve our value to the organizations that we support. Now, understanding that where we are, and where we want to go, has to be in line where the business wants us to go as well. So, one of the most important things is to understand where you are today. What is the value that you're being delivered to the business, and what are your capabilities as an organization? Have a clear vision as to where you want to be. The old adage, if you don't know where you want to be, any road will take you there. But you have to also understand where the business wants you to be. And this is where you find some of the misalignments. Sometimes you go out and you talk to the stakeholders and say, you know what, we really want the organization to be driving more innovative ideas from the supply base. And all they're doing is really focused on price. So that's where the business is sort of pulling us along. You've got other situations where procurement wants to push the envelope, and it's certainly we want to be at level 4, level 5, and the business saying, hey, just go get us stuff. We can make a ton of money, don't really care. And I actually have some clients like that. Some of these organizations, and I won't say which industries, but the business really says, hey, just get us the stuff. It's not a focus right now. We're focused on top line growth. Just get us the stuff, and over time, we'll get there. And what it really goes down to is the 4th bullet I have here. You got to ready yourself. We're all going to move at different paces through this value evolution as an organization. But you have to ready yourself, because at some point the calling is going to come. Yesterday I was with a client in the afternoon, and we were going through this very conversation. They're being challenged. They're sort of relegated to a certain level as an organization. They built capabilities primarily to do sourcing execution. They want to evolve beyond that. The challenge is the business doesn't care whether they do or not at this point. But the calling will come. The environment will change. We don't control all of those aspects. And you have to ready yourself. You have to continue to iteratively improve your capabilities as an organization, improve your services. And sometimes, as my colleague would like to say, have some matches and try to fire up some of those burning platforms that will allow the organization to invest in some of these areas to support the corporate imperatives of the organization. And then lastly, it takes time. I use the term brands aren't built overnight. We all have a brand, and our value proposition is our brand. And if you don't manage that brand, people will brand you. So you have to manage it over time, and it does take some time. It's a journey. Thank you.